girlfriend killed herself tonight.
Huh? Is that a coincidence? No, because the same girl who I came downtown to see was dead too. That's because they're the same person. They're both dead. I couldn't believe that.
Crap. Crap. Mega crap.
I couldn't stop long enough to tell her goodbye that I was sorry.
I'm going through. I just can't smile without you.
What is that?
I don't know. They're trajectory headings for multiple impact re-entry vehicles.
What does that mean?
I don't know, but it's great.
Hi, I'm Mark, and I'm the Cinemaniacs, singular. Tom was supposed to be here today for the witty and intellectually high-minded banter and back and forth and interplay that we usually have, but he walked in sounding much like Froggy or like Brenda Vaccaro on a really bad day after drinking a lot of orange juice and chasing it with some ice cream. So it's just me today. Get used to that. And your one-sided opinions. So if you don't like what I have to say, then there's plenty of other channels. So first up, a little film that you may or may not have heard of, or it's an original film. This is the latest. This is the second. Remember all those other sequels? Forget that. This is the second movie in the series. About 20 years ago that happened, and 20 years later it's happening again. But 40 years later, it's happening again. Michael Myers is back to haunt Laurie Strode on the Hallowest of Eve. You know what it is. Sing along if you know the name. Halloween.
It's cold or steaming hot. Toddy hits the spot with everybody.
Man in the Mask is back. Fun for the whole family, too, by the way. As a matter of fact, I saw this twice this weekend, which may give you a little bit of a tip as to how I felt about it. And there was a couple who brought their young child to see it. So I hope he enjoyed the graphic murder. So here we have a sequel to the original Halloween from 1978. Yes, one of many. Cleverly titled Halloween, not to be confused with Halloween or Halloween. We had 6 Halloween films. Starting in 78, you had the original Halloween, which was intended to be a one-off. And then it made a lot of money. And whenever that happens, finality doesn't come into play. So you had Halloween 2, which picked up right after the original did, which was more the same with Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasance returning. And then you had Halloween 3, where Universal decided, let's turn this into a franchise where, it was already a franchise, but let's turn this into a franchise where every year at Halloween we have a movie called Halloween and a subtitle, and it's just a horror film that's set at Halloween. Well, that tanked hugely because it didn't have Michael Myers in it, but it has since become a very popular film. I actually like it quite a bit. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. It's pretty great. Then you had, in 1988, you came back with Halloween 4, and then you had Halloween 5 and Halloween 6, and they got progressively more of the same and progressively less interesting, to me at least, progressively ridiculous. And then you had Halloween H2O in 1998, where Jamie Lee Curtis said, okay, I'll do one more. And she came back, and that was the first film, as I said, alluded to earlier. Halloween H2O was the first film to say, forget all the sequels. There was the original, and then there's this one. And that movie made a lot of money, so they made another movie called Halloween Resurrection, which was awful. Probably one of the worst double features I've ever seen. I was at the Northfield Drive-In, and a friend and I went to see Halloween Resurrection and Master of Disguise. He still refers to Master of Disguise as perhaps the worst film he's ever seen. When a comedy's not funny, where do you go? So that killed the franchise with Halloween Resurrection. Then you had Rob Zombie come and do a remake of Halloween, which some liked and some didn't. He did a second Halloween, which some liked and more didn't. And then that was it until now. So here we have Halloween 2018, directed by David Gordon Green, who did things you wouldn't think would lead you to a Halloween movie. He did movies like Pineapple Express and Your Highness, a really good movie called Joe. I think he got progressively more serious with the movies he made. And you have one of the writers is Danny McBride, who had worked together with the director. And again, when you're thinking of all the people who might write a Halloween movie, Danny McBride probably not high on that list. It was Danny McBride and 2 other guys. So I was really nervous when I heard this was coming with Danny McBride as the person who was thinking it up, because I'm like, oh, this is going to be some dumb spoof. It's not. It's very serious. I mean, it has funny moments. Arguably, some of the funny moments would be better if they weren't in the film, but they're not a lot. I had heard this film was very jokey going in, but it really isn't. It's got some light moments, but I mean, just about all horror movies do. What you have is, it is 40 years after the horrific events of Halloween night 1978 in Haddonfield, Illinois. Michael Myers is still alive. He was captured right after the first movie and thrown in the loony bin, or mental facility. And it opens with this young British couple who are podcasters who are trying to do looking back at all of the events of that night and trying to make sense of it. So they are our guide back into the world of Halloween and Michael Myers. So they visit him at the mental institution, and then they find Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, who has become a PTSD, paranoid, very traumatized, very survivalist kind of person who has been living every night waiting for Michael Myers to escape, so as she says in the trailer, so that she can kill him. So she is very, her house is a fortress. She's loaded up with guns. She's very not a stable person. So we meet the characters this way. Then we see that Laurie Strode has a daughter, Judy Greer, who's a very stable person. She's the polar opposite of her mother in terms of how she views the world. And then there is Jamie Lee Curtis's granddaughter, who is essentially the same character Jamie Lee Curtis was in the first movie. So if I have any beef with this new Halloween, is that a lot of times filmmakers get a little chubby being able to sort of, redo scenes from an original or kind of half remake the original film. Like there was this, started to say it, prequel to John Carpenter's The Thing, cleverly titled The Thing, which was essentially a remake. It was the exact same movie all over again, but with the little twists. So I was afraid that that's what this was going to be when I first watched it. There are moments where you have certain scenes that echo scenes from the original. You can either view that as clever and warm and fuzzy, or you can view it as, I kind of saw that before. Overall, though, once this movie kicks into gear, it is very well done. I thought it was a really solid suspense film, which is what the original was more than anything gory. But this is also a pretty solid slasher gore movie. The kills in this are brutal and shocking, and they made me gasp or giggle more than a few times. The audience I saw this with at the Alamo Drafthouse Yonkers yesterday got very vocal at certain points in the movie in terms of how much they appreciated what was going on or how shocked they were at parts of it, which to me makes the movie more fun. Don't talk during the movie, but, react appropriately. Jamie Lee Curtis, it's very interesting to see her back in this character. Again, I would say after 40 years, but honestly, it's been after 20 years or less because she was in Resurrection briefly. And at first, it was hard for me to see Laurie Strode again. I was seeing, hey, it's Jamie Lee Curtis, and I know her from interviews and multiple other movies, and it's not like it was when Halloween came out, when Laurie Strode was this girl who was a straight shooter high school student who was being terrorized by this guy. We have had so many movies and so many public appearances and interviews now that you know her as, hey, that's Jamie Lee Curtis on screen. I think the second time I watched it, I got it a little bit better. But it was interesting to see this character, a somewhat realistic depiction and or analysis of PTSD and trauma and how that ruins and shapes somebody's life and then reverberates into the successive generations of that person's family, and how this one traumatic event that happened over the course of one night 40 years ago has caused so much strife and pain within this whole larger group of people. I almost wish there was a little bit more of that. I almost wish there was a little bit more in the realm of quieter moments in this film. But at the same time, it takes a little while to get going, but once it gets going, it doesn't stop. I really liked it. Like I said, there's not a lot of movies I would see more than once in a theater these days, let alone 2 days in a row. About roughly within the span of 24 hours, I saw this movie twice and thought it was really good. So that is out now in theaters. I love the fact that a lot of drive-ins right now that are still open in the chilly months are double featuring the original and this, so you can see the movie and its sequel next to each other. I don't know how much the second one is going to suffer after seeing the first one so fresh, because it's such a masterful piece of filmmaking. And I also love that certain theaters, like Keene Cinemas right here, have taken it upon themselves to have a costumed Michael Myers just show up in the theater in the middle of the film, which I think is showmanship, and that's entertainment. I think it's great. So anyway, to not talk about this film for the entire period, I really enjoyed this. It's a lot of fun. It may or may not restart the series again, but I would be fine if this killed the series, because it's good and it's a good way to stop it. Speaking of stopping, okay, so here's a movie I also saw this weekend. It wasn't on the list for today, but I shoehorned it in because I thought it was really good. Oops. So a young girl witnesses the murder or accidental shooting of a good friend of hers by a police officer, which starts a whole mess of trouble for her and her community. And she finds out what becomes of The Hate You Give. Okay, so this is based on a book, which I didn't know because I wouldn't say I'm not much of a reader. I like the nonfiction. So, and I probably wouldn't have read something as serious as this in my free time. This is ripped from today's headlines, as they say. It is so like of right now. You wonder how long ago was this book written? Was it like a recent book, or maybe the filmmakers updated aspects of it? I don't know. This was really good. This is like one of the best things I've seen this year. Maybe because it means something, and it is what is going on. It is what has been going on. It's sadly what will be going on, and it looks at it from a very microcosm isn't the right word. It's not a broad issue. It is this one girl. This girl, she lives on the wrong side of the track. She lives in a rough neighborhood. Her mother wants a better life for her, so she puts her and her children, her sister and brother, into, for lack of better terms, a white school. She puts them into like a private school on the good side of the tracks, but nobody knows where she comes from. So there's this. It deals with identity, racial identity, social identity, a lot of things like that. Trying to be what you're not in order to pass or to get farther in life than you would be if you just relied on where you come from. But it's got so many positive messages in it that everybody should hear. And it's a perspective that maybe some people should be listening to. Sadly, I was talking to somebody else about this movie. This is kind of like the Michael Moore documentaries. There's a lot of good information here a certain side should be hearing, but probably isn't going to be willing to listen to, and that's unfortunate. It actually does, nicely and surprising to me, it does give you both aspects of a police shooting, because there is a segment that are just like, police brutality, police are evil. Then there's another segment that the police are great and they can never do anything wrong. One of the characters in here, sorry, I think I'm getting off track because I don't have another guy here to guide me back onto course. It's going to be a problem. So basically this girl's in a school, and she goes and she's hanging out with an old friend of hers in the neighborhood she hasn't seen for a long time, and they get pulled over for a minor infraction, and there's a lot of tension, and the boy is shot and killed. So she then has to go on and not let anybody know that she's the witness for a multitude of reasons, including her and her family's safety, and she doesn't want all the kids at school to suddenly view her as that girl from the wrong side of the tracks who witnessed the shooting. So there's a lot of internal struggle with the star character as to, does she speak up and testify about this? Does she keep it quiet? Does she let anybody know? And it's so interesting and so well done. The star, pardon me while I look away for a second. Amelia Stenberg, who is in The Darkest Minds, she's really good. This is her film. She is the shining light of this film. You also have Anthony Mackie, who you would recognize from was it the Iron Man movies? Captain America movies. I can't remember. Sorry, he's an Avenger. And he's not a nice guy in this film. It's really, really fascinating. It portrays this, this black neighborhood, and the girl's father is a former gang member, but now he runs a local store, and they have all the local, business owners and people who watch each other's back. And let me tell you, there's a guy who runs a barbecue place, and the whole time I'm watching this movie is like, I want to go to this barbecue shack. Damn, can they serve barbecue in the theater? Because this stuff looks really good. So it is very serious. It is very good. It is very hopeful. This is the kind of movie that you used to see in the 70s. This is the kind of movie that, it's a weird equation, but it's the kind of movie that a lot of blaxploitation movies used to be. Ostensibly, they were ridiculous and silly and about shooting people, but ultimately they were about making your community better. And this movie is about making your community better on both sides of the tracks. It's about making the whole community we all have better. So I would highly recommend The Hate You Give. It is really good. It's a bit hard to sit through at times in terms of just how dramatic it is, but it's not graphic or anything. It's unpleasant, and it's unpleasant because it's true. So this is in theaters now. It is not playing locally. I saw this out of town, but I think it'll be around for a while, and hopefully you'll be seeing some names like the director, George Tillman Jr., or Amelia Stenberg when they start handing out those gold things, because I think it's kind of worth it. So that is all we have for the Royal We for what's in theaters right now. Not a lot came out this week. I will now move on to that which you can see in the comfort of your own home or car or laptop or device or format or service or whatever. First up, tiny. Speaking of tiny, important, intimate films that are ripped from today's headlines and just really, really realistic. Who do you call when things are going wacky and you need people who can shrink down to be super tiny or super tall? Well, obviously, the first... unless it's AAA superhero service, it's probably in the phone book going to be Ant-Man and the Wasp.
That leaves you with a nice, warm glow.
I really like this. I like the previous Ant-Man. These are fun. These are not the heavy-handed, universe-sucking vortex, 15 characters and subplots movies that the other Marvel films are. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Well, no, there's a lot wrong with that, but this is not that. This is very light. This is, if I said a comic booky movie, this is what that is. This is, it's a comedy more than it is anything else. And I keep saying that I want Marvel films or superhero movies that are not 2.5 hours and about the end of the universe. I want a superhero movie that's 90 minutes or less, and it's about trying to stop a runaway train or trying to avert a bank robbery. If you watch the old George Reeves Superman show, he was foiling petty criminals half the time. It wasn't always the end of the world and these crazy, huge creatures and monsters. But I assume that audiences want more than that these days for their $14 or whatever in the theater. They want, something a bit grander in scale. So whatever. Anyway, part of the story of Ant-Man and the Wasp is Henry Pym, who is the person who invented this technology, portrayed by Michael Douglas. He lost his wife going into this other dimension long ago and thinks she's still out there. And part of this story is trying to get in and get her back. And that actually ties in, I can't recall if it's the ending of this movie or if it's a PS at the end of this movie, but it has been said to be sort of a little tickler regarding the Avengers. Now, having said that, I haven't seen this movie since it was in the theaters, and I could very well be talking about the first Ant-Man movie. So I could be wrong. I might be off by a film in the franchise, but I think that's the case. Anyway, it's a Marvel movie, so there's a PS at the end. So this film is light, and it's fast, and it's fun. There's a lot of good action, and I say good action meaning you can see what's going on, and thus it is impressive. Ant-Man has the ability to be very tiny or very tall, and sometimes within one fight sequence, he can be huge or he can be small, and the fluidity with which they do that is extremely impressive and very funny. It's time to pick a vehicle for them to go out on a mission, and they open up an old Hot Wheels carrying case, and it's filled with miniaturized versions of all the vehicles they can choose from. That's just funny. And there's a sequence where they shrink the entire building their lab is in down to the size of a rollaway suitcase, and they're essentially playing hot potato with a skyscraper between these various people tossing this building back and forth. And I thought that was funny. So I had a really, really great time with this. This is one that a lot of what we watch for the show, I watch, frankly, because we have to, and I don't really make an effort to see them again. But when I saw that this was coming out on video, I'm like, yeah, I want to watch this again. This one was a lot of fun. And it's got the Partridge Family theme in it, which, frankly, for me in the theater, it was cool to hear Come On, Get Happy in surround sound. Anyway, Ant-Man and the Wasp is out now. You don't necessarily, I don't think, have to see the first Ant-Man to appreciate this. I'm sure it helps, but, between you and me, movies are designed so that somebody can walk off the street never having seen a movie and understand what goes on in it, the new Halloween included. So, up next, this is an incredibly, incredibly light week this week. We have a new release of an old film from MVD, our good friends at MVD. This is an interesting one. This is a movie that I always saw on the video shelf, and I always said, wow, that's something I'm never going to watch. But thanks to my friends at MVD, I kind of had to. This is a release from Moonbeam Entertainment, which was an offshoot, a kids offshoot of Full Moon Features, who you might know as the company in the late 80s, 90s, 2000s, who did all the direct-to-video, the Puppet Master and Subspecies and Seed People, all the Charles Band stuff. Well, this was the inaugural release back in the late 90s or mid to late 90s of Moonbeam Entertainment. A little kid and his family come across cute little dinosaurs, and what befalls their house is nothing short of prehysteria.
Mommy, look Pineville! Jimmy, please, not now. I'm too busy.
Yeah, so it lived up to my expectations. So this was produced in the wake of Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park either came out or was coming out, and all of these lower budget companies rushed out dinosaur films. You had Carnosaur from Roger Corman's company, and you had Prehysteria from Charles Band's company. Interestingly enough, this was directed by Charles and Albert Band. Charles Band is the guy who was behind all of the Full Moon stuff, either as director or producer. Albert Ben was his father, who had directed movies like in the 50s. I think he directed I Bury the Living. So it was kind of neat to see them working together on a film, and certainly somebody who'd been working so much earlier. This was actually 1993, so it was not late 90s, it was early 90s. I recognized the kid star of this film, and I looked it up, and he was actually the star of Last Action Hero, and did a couple other things around that time, and as a couple of sort of familiar faces on the sort of B or C string actors. The actor who plays the boy's father you'd recognize from a lot of like cop shows, and he's the kind of guy who always plays a government official or a cop or a city official or something like that. The basic story here is this family of raisin farmers go to this local antiques shop to sell off some things, and something gets swapped, and they wind up walking away with a cooler full of dinosaur eggs, and they hatch, and they're very protective of the dinosaurs, and the evil, what do you want to call it, greedy, money-hungry guy who runs the antique store wants the dinosaurs back, so it's give me back my dinos. The dinosaurs are all practical or stop motion, which is cool. I really don't like CGI, so to see things, even if they looked cheesy and like puppets, they looked like they were really there. And they were fairly cute and amusing and well modeled and well crafted, so it's got that going for it. It's really just a kids' comedy. It's a pretty light kids' comedy. I didn't particularly find it funny, but again, I'm not the audience for it. Would a kid today sit through it? Maybe. I'm not sure. These kids today with the tight pants and the hot rods and the rock and roll music, I don't know what they like. I don't know if a kid now looking at this would not get into it because it's practical effects, if they are expecting a CGI aesthetic or not. They might sit through it. I think this release predominantly is for kids who saw it when they were young. They probably have a nostalgia for it. They probably can overlook everything that somebody with adult eyes looking at it would see and go, so it is there for them in sparkling HD. Transfer looks really good. There are extras. There is a commentary with Charles Band and somebody else. I didn't get a chance to listen to it. I kind of wanted to. So I don't know if this is a more recent commentary or if this had been done when this got an initial DVD release, perhaps. I don't think it dates back to '93. Most interestingly, it has a video zone feature. Now, if you used to rent Full Moon videos back in the day, like I did at the video store, a lot of these things would have a little 15, 20 minute, whatever else they could cram on a T120 tape, making of. So this is an original, sadly original to the degree that it looks like it came off an old rental tape. It's pretty fuzzy and not perfect looking, but it's an original 20-minute or so behind the scenes where they explain, you know, what movie entertainment is going to be and making of the movie and behind the scenes, an interview with all the cast, and it's more than you would expect for a movie like Prehysteria, which apparently there were like 3 or 4 or 5 of these. There were apparently a lot of these films. So I don't know if Full Moon and MVD is intending on putting more of these out. Probably depends on sales, but at any rate, if you are a fond nostalgist for the 90s or the early 90s, this feels very much like that. If you want to see a kids movie with dinosaurs, it is inoffensive as could be, really. If you want to see the kid from Last Action Hero in another movie, hey, Prehysteria is out there now. So that is out now from MVD. So now we move on to the Arrow Video Corner. I don't know. Oh, hey, okay, we'll have the Arrow. It's not going to shoot anybody. It's going to shoot Jim Carrey just above the brow. There it is, just above the brow. Tom's not here to get it in the Hoylick today. So here's a release that is a movie I've heard of for a long time. And so this is one of the things I love about Arrow. They put out all kinds of crazy stuff. This is a very low budget film, that a tale of gang war in the inner city and what one man does to live up or down to the title of, not limited to or withstanding, legally speaking, with the Deadbeat at Dawn.
Beautiful idea.
New Hidden Magic with conditioners. The first rich hairspray.
More fun for the whole family. If you liked Prehysteria, you'll love Deadbeat at Dawn. I'd long heard of this. This had a video release, pretty minor video release, if I recall, back like in the 90s. I'm trying to recall when this film dates from. So the brainchild of the film's, I believe the film star, Jim Van Bever, it is about this guy he's a rough and tumble guy, and he's got a beef with other guys in another gang, and one thing leads to another, and it's a gang war. So there's not a lot to this film plot-wise so much, other than to see that this guy's a rough and tumble guy and he doesn't take no bull from nobody. And what this becomes, it goes from this very low end, very low budget, not great in terms of acting or cinematography or sound design or any of that, and then the action kicks in. And that's where it got my attention. Because suddenly you have guys rappelling down the sides of buildings and jumping over cars and super rough, gross, gory fight scenes and fisticuffs and guns and knives and chains, all the things that they were worried about at the beginning of Adam 12. And I started getting really impressed. I'm like, man, they really pulled a lot off. I mean, as a veteran, you know, I don't even have a stripe, but as a veteran of student films and things like that, where you try to get away with as much as you could before the cops showed up, or see what you could get for free, or what you could do this side of hurting somebody in a stunt, to see what they pulled off in this movie, it was kind of jaw-dropping at times. It's just like, did anybody like get seriously injured in the making of this? This is crazy. And what looks at first like, you know, better than Rudy Ray Moore, but sort of low-level martial arts abilities comes into play, and it's like, wow, these guys choreographed some good stuff. Now, I'm not going to say this is like Jackie Chan or On Bak level or anything like that, but it's really impressive for what it is, and I had a really good time with Deadbeat at Dawn. This is a good movie. This is one where you get your friends together and you just, you know, get a pizza and have fun with it. It's more, once it kicks into the action, it's pretty much that for the rest of the film, and a lot of blood and a lot of grue and a lot of heart. So it's not for everybody, but I had a good time with it. Now the disc, because it's Arrow, and because you're talking about an indie filmmaker who kept everything, it is loaded with extras. You have commentaries, you have short films, music videos that he directed, making of, on and on and on. I didn't even scratch the surface of what this has to offer in terms of supplemental features, but it's loaded. So I think if you've had any previous version of Deadbeat at Dawn, this is safe. I mean, it always is with Arrow, but it is pretty safe to say, if you really like this movie, this is now the definitive version of it. It looks as good as it can look. I mean, it's not a gorgeous film. This doesn't look like a Mario Bava movie or anything like this. The colors are somewhat muted because I think it was shot on probably cheap 16mm stock, but it is very interesting. And if you like sort of edgy, rough and tumble, have I said rough and tumble enough? Action indie movies, it is absolutely worth checking this movie out. Bear with it, because it gets pretty nuts after a while. So we have another Arrow film to discuss. This is an Arrow Academy release. Now Arrow tends to be more genre films, and by genre I mean Arrow is action, it's horror, it's sci-fi, it's exploitation, all the things that make life worth living. And Arrow Academy tends to be art house, foreign, documentary, the classy stuff. So here we have an Arrow Academy release of a British film, which basically traces, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Halloween. It is a British family where the father is a drinker and abusive, and there's not a lot of love to be spread around, and how his actions reverberate through the rest of his family. The film is entitled Distant Voices, Still Lives. So not exactly a barrel full of laughs. I don't know if there are any laughs in this movie, actually. This is one I'd never heard of. But looking again at the supplements, this is considered by some people in England to be like one of the great British films. I hadn't heard of it. Thanks to Arrow, now I have. You have Pete Postlethwaite, who people know from, I believe, Jurassic Park, funny enough. From a lot of, he made a splash over here in the 90s up until his untimely death, but he'd been working in England a lot longer than this, a lot longer than that. And it's basically set in the 40s and 50s. And as I said before, it's this alcoholic abusive father, and how his family deals with his death. And it's really interesting because you know of people, maybe you know people, maybe you are people, who have a family member who, for all intents and purposes, is not a very pleasant person to be around. But there's still that love there, which is weird from a distance when you look at that. And there's still that familial bond. So you see his relationship with his daughters and with his wife and with his son, and how that affects their relationships with each other and other people. It's a very quiet film. It's not a fast-paced film. It kind of moves back and forth in time a bit, so it took me a little bit of time to figure out the chronology of what I was watching. But it's one of those movies that feels very authentic. It's not very grand in scope. I think it takes place in maybe 4 locations. It's a kitchen, it's a living room, it's a local pub, and it's just real people talking for the most part. But it feels very real. It feels real in terms of how it looks. It doesn't necessarily feel like people are putting on the 40s and 50s like a lot of movies can, but it also feels real in terms of how people talk and how people react to these things in their lives, and how how it affects them from being a little kid dealing with a certain thing until an adult. And then when that person is not in your life anymore, how you fill that void. Are you glad they're gone? Are you wrestling with the things you never said that you wanted to say? Are you wrestling with unresolved issues or what? That's all in this film. This is one of those movies that it is very well acted. It's well done. It's very simple, very cleanly shot. No shaky, messy garbage. It was before all that came into play. But it's very interesting. It is loaded with extras, as always. You have critical appreciations. You have commentary. You have interviews with various people who were involved with it. It's really interesting. It reminds me of a term that I've heard. I don't know if it completely applies to this, but kitchen sink drama. I've heard of those from England from like the 60s and 70s, which I always took to mean it's just a drama that takes place in a small flat with average people, and not everything but the kitchen sink, but it's average people dealing with normal daily life and how they get by. And Distant Voices, Still Lives is that. So that is out now on Arrow Academy, which is Arrow, available wherever finer DVD and Blu-ray is sold. That's all I have on my list for today. Without the witty interplay and just, really intellectual discussions that we normally have here, show runs a lot shorter. And I also cut about 4 things that I hadn't seen. So I guess I'm just going to wrap it up with that. I don't have anything else particular to blab about. I've got one more weekend at my beloved Mahoning Drive-In Theater coming up this weekend. It's Season Ender. It's a 90s horror weekend. So on Friday night, the 26th, we have Scream and Scream 2. And Saturday night, the 27th, we have I Know What You Did Last Summer and The Craft, which I've actually never seen. It always looked bad to me, but I figure I'm never going to like it more than on film on the big screen. So we're going to be doing that. And that's about it. The new Suspiria comes out, I think, Halloween week. Huge Dario Argento fan. Suspiria is one of my favorite movies, period. And it seems really like, between you and me, this isn't on, right? This new movie looks good. The new Suspiria looks good. And it's real sacrilege to say this, and I can't believe I am, but it could possibly be better than the original movie, just because Suspiria is such a sensory experience, the 76 original, 77. It's about that amazing score and the amazing sets and the visuals and the set pieces. But, I mean, come on, honestly, the acting isn't great in Suspiria. Jessica Harper's cool, but the acting isn't great in Suspiria. And there's not a lot to it. So if this new film does what a good remake could do, which is, let's take the seed of that idea and explore other things. It's got a shot. It's from a filmmaker who's done really good work. The visuals I see in the trailers look really good. The people who did the score have a good reputation behind them. So I'm actually, strangely, really looking forward to a remake of one of my favorite films. That comes out, I think it's the 30th or the 28th or something like that. So I'm going to try to see that and talk about that on the show. If Tom doesn't have it on our list here, I'll just mention it at the end of the show like this, but that's out. And what else do we have? Hunter Killer, which is a Gerard Butler submarine warfare, submarine militaristic type thriller. Johnny English again, strikes again. Johnny English returns. I never liked the Johnny English movies. I love Rowan Atkinson. I love slapstick. I love spy movies, spy spoofs, theoretically. The Johnny English movies I've never enjoyed, so I don't know if the third time is going to be the charm with this or not. I'm not sure anybody in this country was really pining for a third Johnny English, but... and he does have Suspiria on the list. So either way, we'll be talking about that. So until next week, humbly, I'm Mark. I am the Cinemaniac.